Hey everyone, today's video will cover an introduction to 3D modeling workflows. I will not only cover the most common modeling tools, but also discuss workflows and techniques that can be applied to creating 3D models at higher skill levels. I can personally vouch for this as I use these workflows on a regular basis when 3D modeling. I will be using Maya 2020.4 in this tutorial, but know that these workflows can transfer to any 3D software. So let's get right into it. So here we are in Maya, and you can see we have our stopwatch model, which we will be creating in this tutorial. Now, the first thing that I want to cover is the Maya interface. So if you are already comfortable with the Maya interface, feel free to skip to the next chapter, which is setting up reference images. Now, here at the top, we have our menus, and these menus are dependent on the menu sets icon here and this drop down. So at any given time, anything that's after this Windows menu will change depending on the context within the pipeline. So we have, modeling, rigging, animation, effects, and rendering, and you can also create your own version. I will be using modeling, and if you want your UI to look exactly like this, I'm simply using modeling standard. So if you're using Maya Classic, you'll see how the UI changes, and you get, the additional time slider and some extra menus. But since this focus is going to be strictly on modeling, I like to use just modeling standards. So you can switch over to modeling standard, and we have our UI that we'll be using during this tutorial. The next thing that we have is just these common tools, which you got, your save, open, files, and redo and undo. You have select by different types of hierarchies here. You have your grids and snapping. And you also have, symmetry and some rendering icons, and as well as some transforms. So I won't really be using these, but these are here. And then of course we have our Maya shelves. So these shelves are just, default within Maya. And you can also add and customize these in any way possible. You can middle mouse drag, or even if you wanted to add in your own icons here, you can just hold Control Shift in a menu and left click, and you can see you can add that there, and then middle mouse drag that to wherever you want. You can also just right click and delete that if you're interested to do that. You also have your tools here, which is just your marquee select and different types of selections, and you have your move tool and your rotation tool and your scale tool. All right. Now you need to make sure that you have an object selected so you can see those in action, so you can see move, rotate, and scale. Then you have your last tool selected. I typically don't use these. I actually never use these in all honesty. Instead, I'll be using the hotkeys, which we'll go over shortly. Then you have just panel layouts, and in our case, we're just going to be using the standard 4-window layout. So if you hit spacebar on your keyboard, you can go to perspective view, top view, front view, side view. All right. Now the next thing is you'll see outliner here on the left. And so if you don't see outliner for whatever reason, you can always click this icon, this outline icon here on the left. And then you have your 4 windows. And like I said, you can just press spacebar, and then that will maximize your viewport. Then here on the right, you have all these different menus that we'll be bouncing between. We have our channel box editor. We have our attribute editor here. And if I open that up, attribute editor, and then you have modeling toolkit. Now each one of these are dependent or synced up with these icons here. So you can open up, this is actually tool settings. It's opening up on my other monitor. So you can see if I bring that over here. So this is just settings specifically for your tools. I won't be really using that much here. And this is the icon for channel box, and this is the icon for attribute editor. Now you can always hit Control A to just toggle attribute editor, which will switch between your channel box and attribute editor, whichever you have last open, which should be the channel box and modeling toolkit. The channel box and attribute editor. Then at the bottom right corner, you have your display layers and your animation layers. We won't really be using that, but just know that those are here. And then at the bottom, you also have MEL scripts and your script panels, if you want that, also known as the command line. Now, if you've never navigated in Maya before, it's very simple. All you need to do is hold the Alt button on your keyboard and left click drag, which will orbit your camera around your object. You can also hold Alt and middle mouse and hold that, and you'll see that we start to pan the camera around. And then you can simply use the scroll wheel if you want to kind of do a incremental step closer to your object, or if you want a smooth step and smooth zoom in like this, simply hold Alt and right mouse button drag. All right. So again, that's Alt middle mouse to pan, Alt left click to orbit, and Alt right mouse button to zoom. Or you can alternatively scroll with your mouse wheel to zoom in. And to use simple keys for translation, if you hold W, or excuse me, if you press W, you get your move tool, like so. If you press E, you get your rotate tool, so you can rotate your objects. And you get R for scale. So it's very nice. You might be, thinking, oh, well, why didn't they, use R for rotate, E for scale? It's all about the QWERTY keyboard, so the QWERT, right? And so that allows you to just easily get these transform tools whenever you want. So if you see me jump to these tools, I will always be using Q for easily selecting, W for translating and moving, E for rotation, and R for scale. All right, so that covers everything that you need to understand if this is your very first time in Maya in 3D. All right, so now that we know that, we can set up now our image plane for our modeling process. So what I'll do is just simply hide this model here, and we're going to start fresh. So I'll hit spacebar to open up our windows here, our 4 panels, and I will jump to the front camera so you can see front here, and press spacebar to maximize this front view. Now to add in an image plane, the first thing you obviously need to do is download the reference. So you can see here I have, for one, actually, if you're interested, there's some interface overview. I always like to refer to my documentation. It's a nice, easy way to really know and learn. This is your first time within Maya. All right. Now, for the stopwatch, you have that here. I just found a simple stopwatch stock photo, and this is what we'll be using to model. And I just clicked on this. This is a nice resolution, 1024 by 1024, so it's a solid 1K, and it's going to hold up really well. Feel free to grab whichever version you want, as I'll cover basic techniques here that can be applied to creating any simple stopwatch model. So I grabbed that and downloaded it and saved it in my source images folder. For example, I have everything saved in this intro to modeling folder, and I have scenes and source images, and my Maya files are saved in this scene folder, and my source images are saved in this source images folder. My textures are saved into this folder. So I always recommend always setting your project first, and to do that, you can simply go to File, Set Project, and you can find your folder here. And if you navigate to the folder, you can simply go to the folder and hit set, and then now you've set it. And if this is the first time you're setting it, what Maya will do is create this default workspace mel file. So that way, anytime that you're working, if you're moving computers, if you're working in school, just grab that whole Maya folder, go to File, Set Project, and that will always make sure that everything is linked when you first load everything up. So again, if we go to View, to import our reference image now, we go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. And because I already dropped that in my source images folder, Maya by default will look for the textures there. I can find stopwatch, and I don't really care about the watermarks. This is all good, and I can hit OK, and we can bring that in here. Now you can move and position this stopwatch to the center of the origin. You can see that this is centered based off of the center of the image plane, and obviously not the stopwatch. So I can simply move this up to get about the center here, and I know I want to scale this up just a little bit. And if I scale this up with the R tool and scale up, you can see now I can move this and scale this in position. So hit Q. If you didn't see that pop up, first it was showing the image plane here. Just hit Q or click off of it and you'll kind of get the scale transform here. Since I'm not going to be using any of these settings here, I don't want to change the size there. You want to make sure that you're just simply scaling this here. Now what you can do under scale XYZ is click drag and you can select them all at the same time. And I'm going to simply type in 1.15. Why do I do that? So, very precisely is because I want this to be pretty much just about 3 inches wide, 3.5, 4 inches. It doesn't really matter too much as long as we're close. I want this to be close. If you're interested, you can go to Windows and look up the scale. So you can go to Windows, Setting, Preferences, and under the settings, you can see that there's working units and we're working in centimeters. All right. So 3 inches is about 8 centimeters, so we're going to work with that as our scale. I always recommend whenever you're first modeling is to always set up your reference images and always work from reference, right? Everyone thinks, including myself, we all think we know what something looks like, but you always want to come back and refer to reference and use that as your overall guide. So if you want to move this now, like so, press W and simply move it back in the Z axis. So I'm just pushing it back and you can see that I've pushed it back in the translate Z. You'll notice it doesn't change the position here in the front view, it just pushed it back. So, we can actually push this back as far as we want, just as far as we don't go too far on the depth. If you have to really, really push this out, just increase the depth if you need to. But all right, this will be fine for our needs. And then now that we have our reference image set up, we can begin the 3D modeling process. When it comes to 3D modeling, you can break down even the most complex objects into the simplest of primitives. If it doesn't look like a primitive, right? If it doesn't look like a sphere, cube, cylinder, cone, or whatever, you have to continue to break that down even further until you get these simple shapes that eventually create more complex shapes. I'm obviously using a nice simple cylindrical shape for the demonstration purposes of this workflow. So what I'll do is you can go to the poly modeling shelf here and then click cylinder. And so that will automatically create a cylinder right at the origin. And at the origin, that is the 0, 0, 0, XYZ. And from here, I can hit my E key to rotate, and I can rotate this 90 degrees, and you can type that in the channel box editor. If you don't see your channel box editor, remember, you can hit Control A or hit the channel box icon at the top right. And I'll set this to 90 degrees, so I'm looking at this forward facing. Now, the nice thing about the channel box is I can change the parameters of this cylinder, of all of these primitives. So I can go to radius and middle mouse drag. If you click on the word radius, now middle mouse drag, and you can start to create the overall shape here. Now, if you want to see through this, you can use the X-ray icon here. Now, you will see me actually doing this and toggling the X-ray mode here with a simple script that I shortcut to Alt-X. So this command here is just being hotkeyed with Alt-X. If you're interested in knowing how to do that, you can go to my video here on modeling tips to speed up your workflow, and I cover that here. The scripts are actually right here. You can actually go through if you know how to set up your own hotkeys and whatnot, and just paste these in, and you're good to go. So, and I referenced where I found those in this video here. So be sure to check that out. And I have Alt-X for X-ray, and then I have Control Alt X for wireframe on edges, or edges on wireframe here. All right. So you'll see me doing this without clicking these icons. So again, X-ray is here, and wireframe on shaded is here in the viewport menu icons. All right. So hopefully you can see that, and you should be able to keep up as I'm doing this. So I will go into X-ray mode here, and you can see now I can start to just more closely position this. What's important here is I want this cylinder at the 0, 0, 0 if I can help it, right? It's going to make mirroring easier, which you'll see us do later on in the tutorial. So for now, I'm just going to bring this reference image up here and actually just scale this just a little bit more so it more closely matches the outer diameter here and of our cylinder. So now that I've got this lined up, I want to change the subdivision axis here. And instead of using 20, I always like to use what's called the power of 2. So be it 8 or 16 or 32. Now, depending on the density that I need, I will go up higher. Sometimes, if I'm going for something super smooth, I'll set this to 64, and you'll actually see me do that for one of these objects here. So I will use 32 subdivisions, and I will also set the height here to about 1.5 or 1.25. We can always change this later, and this gives us a good starting base. So this nice cylindrical shape and primitive is going to give us the overall form for this object. Now, when you're working with objects, I'll hide the grid here, so that's not in our way. And if you want to hide the grid, you can simply press this icon here at the top of the viewport panels. All right, and you can see that there's a lot of different icons, so experiment with kind of what each one of those do. But now that we have this, what you need to understand is that this, when we're translating and modifying this object, this is called object mode, right? If you want to actually start modifying the subcomponents here, this is where you would head over to the modeling toolkit here at the top right, and now you can see there's multi-component. So for starters, if I click this is kind of face mode or polygon mode, face selection, and you can start to see it goes from being green and it changes to being blue. The wireframe changes to being blue. This lets you know that you are now in multi-component mode, right? Now you may have seen me just quickly switch to these different component modes. There are a bunch of ways to do the same thing really in any software, right? So if I hit Q, so always if you want to exit back, right? So this is like, edit mode in Blender, right? If you want to exit this multi-component mode, just edit mode, hit Q to go to the marquee selection tool or the object select tool, and then hold right click and go to object mode. And then there you go. And then we're now in object mode. You could also do this with this icon here, object mode. And you can also see it tells you object selection F8. So if I hit F8 on my keyboard, well, that's object mode, right? That'll toggle object mode. F9 will give us vertice mode. F10 will give us edge mode here, so you can start to see we have edges. And then we have F11, which is going to give us face selections. So you can do that with F8, 9, 10, and 11. You can do that through these multi-component icons. And you can also hold right click and change your selection mode here. I am going to be using this primarily for this tutorial, but I want to at least show you where to do all of these different things. These are called marquee menus. So these marking menus are context specific, meaning if I simply hold right click, you'll see that I can go into object mode, and there's a whole bunch of other things that we can do, like assigning materials and looking at all of these, UV sets and different types of selections and whatnot. All right. So get comfortable with knowing where each one of these, honestly, like when I'm going in edge mode, I don't even look, right? I just simply hold right click and go in edge mode, face mode, vertex mode. It is super, super fast. You can also do that again with the F number keys. I highly recommend, as you're learning 3D, don't force yourself to go over here. The modeling toolkit, the shelf, is great when you're first starting to learn because it lets you know what all the icons mean. It shows you all the tools that exist. But know that for your workflows, you're going to want to be using these marking menus. All right. So now that we have this, right, we have our 16 or 32 subdivisions, we want to start working. Now, you also may be wondering, why did I pick 32? Or why do I even use powers of 2? The reason why is from an optimization standpoint. Let's say I create a high poly version and I want to go down to a low poly version of the model. Well, I can simply select every other edge here, leaving the line of symmetry line. And I can hold Control backspace and delete those. And look at that. We still get this nice, clean cutout here, right? You can see that this is a nice quadrant. So these lines are the ones that I care about, right? I can easily mirror from top to bottom, or I can mirror horizontally. So vertically or horizontally, or I should say x-axis or y-axis, right? So now that I know that that's the main reason, I can cover the optimization techniques in future tutorials, but that's the main reason why. And it's never failed me. I'll create things that's smaller bolt objects that are 8 subdivisions, and then medium details 16 and higher 32. But now that we know that, let's actually start modeling, right? So let's go into face mode. So hold right click, go into face mode, and then we want to select these faces here. Now, if you simply select these faces without changing any of the default options, look what happens. It selects the back faces of the object. Sometimes this is what you want, but right now this is not what we want, right? So what you need to do is enable, if you want to enable this, you can do camera-based selection. So if you turn that on, and then now if I click off with left click, then click again, watch, I can marquee select that, and I'm good to go here for this object, right? And what I will do is also just go to this Lambert material, just kind of darken it a bit so you can see a bit more contrast here as we model. All right, so I'm going to select these faces here, and this will work. And another selection mode, instead of just, marquee selecting is very nice. You can, and of course you don't want to like manually click, that's going to take a long time. You can also, if I head back to the modeling toolkit, there's this drag mode. And with drag here, there's a hotkey that you can use to toggle between pick, marquee, and drag. And that's simply holding tab. Watch how the icon changes when I hold tab. So a lot of times I'll do this, where it's kind of like this spray paint effect, and there you go. A lot of times I'll do that, even though this is faster, just because it's kind of fun to simply hold tab and go all the way around. It takes an extra second or two, but that'll work. Now that I have these faces selected, and I've ensured that I do not have back faces selected, I'm going to hit spacebar to go back to my front view and just simply hover over the front view to go into front view. And now I can do what's called extrusion. So I will use different ways of showing you how to do the same thing. I will hit extrude here so you know where it is in the modeling toolkit. And what I want to do, and this is how the extrude tool works. If I extrude out, you see that we create new faces. And I typically, when you want to create them based off of the direction of the faces, you want to extrude on the Z, all right, which is this, well, it turns it into a blue icon, but yellow icon when you select it, but Z is always going to be the blue icon here. Now, I don't need to extrude it that much. You can see that there's just this little ridge here within our reference, right? So we're going to get a little bit of an extrusion, and we're going to create a little bit of an offset. So as long as you don't press Q and exit the tool, you can change your extrude parameters live. Or you can also head to your channel box editor, and you can now see poly extrude face here, and we have local translate here, and we can actually just change this in our channel box right here. So that's also nice. So if I undo that, so make sure you undo until it's gone from here, otherwise you'll have some hidden faces. If I hold now, back to our modeling toolkit, extrude, the other way to do that is holding shift, right click, and look at this. So now you have all of your most common marking menus for modeling, and they are specific to whatever face mode that you're in. When you watch my tutorials, I use these all the time. This is how I model. Most of the time, I don't even have my modeling toolkit up. I just have my channel box editor, and I'm just working. I'm just doing my thing, holding shift, right click, holding shift, right click, holding shift, right click. So I can select any one of these tools, right? So again, shift, right click, and extrude face, and move this out a little bit. And if I local translate now, I'm going to just do something a lot smaller, so 0.2. Then you can use a scale effect here, or you can also use offset. I like using offset because it kind of helps retain the edge flow a bit better. So if I hit square and jump back to my front view, you can see that I can just kind of drag the offset up until it gets pretty close to where I want. So this should be fine here. I might actually want to do maybe 0.3 or 0.35, should give us what right what we need. So this is what we have now. We kind of have this extrusion, and it's kind of tapered and beveled here with the combination of using local translate and offset. So if I hit Q, I'm happy with this. I like where I'm at, and this will give us what we want. Now I'm going to extrude inward. So you can see in our reference here, I might actually bring this a little bit closer so we have that in our perspective view. So we have this, and you can see that I can now select these faces and extrude inward, right? So I want to do essentially the opposite here. So if I hit Q and hold right click and go to face mode, and you can see that it still has the face selection. So I can reselect it with marquee select, making sure that I don't select the back faces. And then instead of using actually the extrude face or using the modeling toolkit, I can press Control E, and you can also use hotkeys. So if you're interested, I cover hotkeys in that the other video that I talked about, but you can go to Windows, Setting Preferences, and go to Hotkey Editor, and you can hotkey anything inside of Maya, and I use them a lot, but I don't use them in my tutorials or when I'm teaching, because people can't keep up if I'm sitting here using hotkeys. So, the marking menu keeps me plenty efficient. So I will now extrude this inwards, right? So if I move this in on the Z, and I'll do something again, maybe like 0.25 minus 0.25. And I want to bring this in with a little bit of an offset again. So we get something like this. So you can kind of see this kind of stepped effect. So we have this ridge here, this outermost ridge. We have another inner ridge, which is this piece here. And it looks like there's one more ridge we can extrude, but I'm going to give this offset a little bit more of a thickness here. And we can go to our front view. Yeah, 0.2 actually works perfect. And I can hit Q to exit that tool. And there we go. Now, if you know you're going to be doing this, extruding over and over and using the same tools, well, Maya's got you covered, because you can simply hit G, right? And the letter G will work perfect. And that's G as in golf. So this will work for what we want. And what that does, it repeats your last operation or your last tool. So perfect. This gives me what I want. I can spacebar over to the front view. I can do another offset like so. And maybe I'll do 0.25. There we go. And now I can move this inward on the Z, where we get something like this, right? So we're just getting kind of this effect here, this stepped effect for our watch. And as long as the radius or the outer radius is good, I can hit Q and kind of exit. And then now I can modify these how I want. Now that the geometry is here, if I hold right click, I can go into edge mode. I can select this face simply by double clicking the edge. So if you click the edge here and you select the neighboring edge, watch how it selects the entire loop of edges. Alternatively, if you wanted to select a ring of edges, which go perpendicular, I can select this edge and then the one that runs essentially parallel to this edge by holding Shift and double clicking. So that one's a little bit different because you would have to hold Shift and double click to select a ring of edges. But I just need this edge here that runs around, and I can press W. So double clicking the edge, press W to move, and I can kind of move these back and forth like so. So this is going to give me what I want. If I want a little bit more control here, and I like where we're at here. Now that we have this, we're starting to get the form that we want, and we've got all the main body extrusions. Now I want to create the lens here. So in order to do that, I can press right click, go into face mode. I still have that face selection, but if I didn't, I can hold tab and circular move this and select this. Then I can hold Shift right click and I can do a duplicate face. Now duplicate face, now if I hit Q and go into object mode, look what it does. It creates this duplicated face and still keeps the original face here. Now, the reason that I do this is so I can create this lens here that's using the same geometry, right? This is another tip where if you can leverage and utilize the existing geometry, then do it, right? I wouldn't want to create a new cylinder and then put this in position and kind of start that process over. So you'll see now in the outliner what it did is it created these new faces here, so you can easily select these. And if you don't want the history, most of the time I don't really keep the history unless the past 1, 2, or 3 operations, is you can delete the history simply by hitting this icon in the poly modeling, or you can do it under edit, delete by type, history, or you can use Alt-Shift-D. Use whichever you'd like. And you can also find all of our modeling tools under mesh, edit mesh, mesh tools, and some mesh display ones as well. So they're all in various locations, again at the top of the menu, under our shelf, and within our modeling toolkit. So now let's pick up the pace a bit. Now that we're getting comfortable with all these tools and these operations, right, I can now create this lens here. And the way that I want to do that is I can hit, again, let's try using Control E for extrude. And we're going to extrude this out to create this glass here. And I will extrude this out to about 0.4. That should give me what I want, since I don't want it to extrude past what I have here. So you can actually go to your front view. Yeah, that's right where we want it. All right. So that will work. And I can hit Q to exit that tool. Now, here's the cool thing is once you start building up these objects and you're like, okay, well, I want to see this object by itself, simply hit Control 1. Control 1 will isolate this, but not hide things. If you want to actually not permanently, but actually hide this, you can go to Display, Hide, and you can do Hide Selection, or you can just use Control H. So Control H will hide it. And then if you want to hide everything, you can do Alt H. Or if you want to bring back the last hidden object, I believe it's Control Shift H. It should be Control Shift H, but you can simply select it in the outliner and hit Shift H as long as you have it selected, and that'll bring it back. So select your object, Control H, or select it in the outliner and hit Shift H, right? That's to hide it. But to isolate, which is kind of a temporary isolation, you hit Control 1. Now, for this glass, I don't want any thickness. So what I'm going to do is go into face mode and select the back sides of these faces here. So I can just marquee select that and simply hit delete on our delete key on our keyboard. So now that I've done that, I deleted the back sides. I can hit Control 1. And we want this to be more like glass, right? We want it to have this nice curvature on curvature covering here. So what I can do now is select this edge. So I can go to edge mode by holding right click edge mode, double clicking this edge, and I can select these and by double clicking and just scale these in a little bit. Notice how now I'm getting this nice curvature here, and it's going to help, but you can start to notice that it's still pretty rigid, right? So if I, again, just scale this down to, it's pretty close to being, right around the center here, but I don't want to scale it too far. Now what we can do is we can use another new tool, which is going to be multi-cut. Multi-cut is great because you can kind of think of it as a Swiss Army knife, meaning you can manually cut. So I can just left click and you can see I can start creating these cuts here. And if you're happy with the cuts, you can actually middle mouse drag here. So I'm just left clicking to create cuts, middle mouse dragging to modify these points, and then hit right click to accept the cut. Now if I hit Q to exit the tool, Control Z to undo, I don't want to manually cut this. Instead, I want to insert an edge loop. And you can do that with your multi-cut tool. So if we hold Shift right click now, multi-cut's right there on the left. So what you can do, there's a couple different ways to do this. I can do this manually, meaning if I now hold Control, hover left click, you'll see that I have this edge loop here. And this is nice because, I can manually position this wherever I want. But if I want to put this in the dead center, just hold Control, right? And middle mouse click, and it always put it in the center. Now, the next thing you can do is double click this edge And then you can kind of move this out manually, or you can hold Control middle mouse, and what that does is it slightly moves it out on the normal as well. So I'll use Control middle mouse later, but that's another way to move things. Or if you're holding Shift right click and multi-cut, I use this a lot too. I'll use this where it's under the Insert Edge Loop tool settings, do Edge Flow. And if I select Edge Flow, watch this now, it's going to automatically, boom, add and create some nice curvature here. So I can also do that here at the top, kind of middle mouse, and you can see that now we're starting to get this nice curvature automatically here. And that looks a lot nicer. You can also bring out this if you wanted to, but I want to keep this a little bit flat here. Now, if you notice some things happening where you want to get more of either the soft shading or hard shading, right? You can select this, and I can, for example, hold right click and go to Soften Harden Edges. And all this is going to do is soften the edges and the faces. So if you see what we have here, you can see this hard edge here. If I select the whole object, Soften Harden Edge, and then Soften Edge, you can see that now you can go to sub menus here, anywhere that there's an arrow. So Soften Harden Edge, Soften Edge, look at that. It gives us this nice soft edge, which is great. Then for this one, if I wanted to, let's say, harden this specific edge, you can also do this at a multi-component level. So I can double click this edge, and then I can also harden this edge there, and there you go, right? So now you can see that it looks pretty close to what we have in our reference here. Great, so we can keep moving here. So we've created the overall base form here and the lens. And you can see if I actually Control H hide that, you can see that we have the texture here, or the geometry we will eventually use for the texture. All right, so this is great. I will keep moving now, and we'll pick up the pace again. So now I'm going to create a new cylinder, and this is going to be positioned right here at, the top right of the object. And I'm going to rotate it in position. And then I'm going to head over to our channel box, and now we're going to lower the radius till we get right about the right width or radius here. Then I will lower the height, and we get something like this. And what I want to do is I want it to be the size of essentially this piece here, right? The middle piece. So I will again kind of put this, rotate this into position. This will work for what we need. Then I can head over here and set this, instead of 32, I'll set it to 16 since it's a much smaller object. And I can select the faces, and then just like before, I can hold tab and marquee select those, or tab and drag, and I can head to the front view, Control E for extrude, and extrude these. So you'll notice I'm doing these tools a bunch of different ways. I'm using the marking menu, I'm using the hotkey, so use whatever you're comfortable with, all right? Now, since I've already extruded, I can hit G to repeat last, and there we go. So now you can start to see how I can really start to gain efficiencies by using these different tools. Now, I want to use multi-cut, right? So I can hold Control, so I grab my multi-cut with Shift right click, hold Control, and I'm going to middle mouse drag that. Boom, look at that. It gives me this nice curvature. Now, don't worry if it's not matching one-to-one. Obviously, there's some perspective that we have to deal with here, and that's fine. I'm just getting the overall form, right? So now I will just do a nice extrusion at the bottom, all right? I need to select and isolate this. So Control 1, select the object, Control 1 to isolate, go into face mode, select these faces like so. And this time, again, I will extrude, offset this a bit, and extrude. And I'm getting the right depth here. So I will use maybe an offset of 0.1, and I'll hit G to repeat last. And this now is a good instance where I want to change the depth of this, or the offset. And I can do that in my channel box. If I go to my channel box editor, I can head down. This is like a very, very simple form of history. I really, really wish Maya had, a better history or modifier like 3ds Max or Blender, but we'll work with what we got. So this offset here, I can increase it to like 0.2 or 0.05, so I need to go the other way. So see how I can change the extrusion offset of the previous extrusion, which is carrying over. This is one of those instances where having history is nice and it will work for our needs. And there you go. So we've created this very simple object here, and I'm happy with how this looks. So what I can do is hit Control-1 to unisolate. Now, if instead of moving this now and putting it in position and spending time doing that, what I can do is simply use a mirror function. So if I hold Shift right click, you can see I have mirror here, right? And I don't know if it's in the modeling toolkit. I don't think so, but you can also find it under mesh, and you can find mirror here as well. So the key thing here is to use the world axis position. This is why I like to work at the 0, 0, 0. And I use a really low threshold like 0.001. And this is exactly what I want. Perfect. So we're good there. Now I want to create this top piece, right? So what I'll do is create another cylinder, bring this up here into position, up in the Z, and head over to our channel box, lower the radius. Now you'll notice this one, I'm going to break this up into multiple objects, and I'm going to lower the height here, this, and lower the radius. So we get something. So if I can't get that precise, I'll do like 0.25. Perfect. 0.25 works great. This is fine, but if you notice, there's a lot of detail here in the top piece here where they kind of control the timer and the dial, the actual like setting of the clock, I believe, or the hands. So what I want to do is I want to create that using geometry. So I'll create another cylinder, bring this up, kind of get this in position again. So you'll notice I'll head back to my radius, change this outer radius to something like maybe 0.35, because we're actually going to do another extrusion. And I will lower the height. Perfect. So we get something like this. Maybe I'll set this to 0.7 or 0.75 should work for what we're doing here. Perfect. So I will then increase the subdivision axis here to 64, right? So if this one is a simple shape here, this one will stay at 16. So I'll set that to 16. This one is 64. Why? Because this is just about the detail that I need to create these ridges. Now you might be thinking, well, we can always texture it. You're absolutely right. But I want to show different modeling techniques here, right? So I'm going to hold right click, go into face mode, and I'm going to select the face and then the neighboring face and double click. So again, that's going to select now the face loop. So select the face, shift, while holding shift, double click the neighboring face. Then once we have these, we can extrude. So we can go to shift right click, extrude face, and then watch this. Now we can extrude, but if we want these ridges here, what I can do, this is going to be really small values here, so I can use 0.01. Watch this, keep faces together, turn that off, and look at that. It separates these faces really nicely. Then I can lower the offset. These are very, very sensitive, very, very sensitive because this is such a small object. So 0.01, maybe I'll do like 0.005, so half that. And there you go. You get this nice effect here where you have all this detail. And look at that. That looks really good. And that looks really close to the reference with what we're trying to achieve here. All right, that looks great. So then now I will do the last couple of pieces here. So I'm going to create now a new primitive instead of all of these were cylinders, right? And that was, by design, nice simple shapes. But now I can use a torus here, which is kind of a 3D donut. So I'll move that up and kind of get this in position. This is about as easy as it gets, right? Because I just have to position this like this. I'll rotate that 90 degrees. I will lower the radius. Now watch what happens, right? Because I lower the radius, then I have to, there's a second radius, which is the section radius here. So I'm going to do something like 0.1 to really tighten that, then increase that radius again. So that's the radius of the overall torus. And then we have the section radius here, which is how thin or thick the section is. All right. So I will kind of bring this up into position, maybe use a value of 0.8. I think that gives me really good thickness there. And then I will do maybe 0.05 or, 0.075 here. It should work, and maybe I'll just bump this up 0.85. So there you go. You can play with these values, but I think this gets us close enough, and I will do what I did last time, where the subdivision axis, so the axis kind of running around, right? If we change these, you can see that increases and decreases that detail, right? In this case, right, for example, if I'm out here and I see this in full frame, I need more detail. These guys are fine, right? So if these guys are a lot smaller and simpler, the overall silhouette works, right? Now, when I say silhouette, if you head over to this view here, use all lights, look at this. If you're not using lights, of course, it just turns everything black, and that's really nice. And this is what I like to do when I'm only looking at the form in the silhouette. And you can start to see the faceting here. You can start to see that it's pretty obvious that there's some low detail there. So I can click that use lights again, or you can actually hit 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded, 6 for material or textured view, and 7 for lights. Okay, so I'll click off the lights. We don't need those. I don't need material view, and we'll just I'll just leave it on material view. That's fine. So now that we understand that, right? Because I don't just like changing things. I don't like doing things without telling you why. So this is kind of coming back to that whole concept of workflows. And this is stuff that I use on a regular basis. So I'll change the subdivision height. This is where it'll increase kind of the detail like along the torus. So again, I'll set this to 16 if I want to optimize that further. But I'll set the subdivision axis to 32. And there you go. This is great. All right, we're almost there. We got this last piece here, and which are the hands on the inside, right? The minute and the hour hand. Thankfully, they're the same thing. So what I will do is use a different primitive, and the primitive that I want to use is actually not even here. It's under the Create tab, Polygon Primitives, and you can find the pipe. So pipe is what I want to use. I believe if I hold shift right click, or does it have pipe here? Oh yeah, you can also find that down here. So if you hold shift right click without any other objects selected, you can create a pipe using that menu as well. So without having objects selected, again, shift right click creates objects, right click will allow you to do context specific things. So I will now rotate this 90 degrees, and we will scale this down. I will bring this radius way down, really kind of scroll in here, and I'll use maybe, I'm going to stick with 0.2 because I want this to, hold up a bit here, and I want the thickness to be a lot smaller, so 0.1. It just needs to be close. It doesn't need to be perfectly one-to-one. Now here's the thing, another tip when modeling. I don't want to model this in the angled position, because that's going to affect my pivot. And I can always change pivots later, so if you want to do that, that's fine. But to keep things simple, I'm going to use either the y-axis or the x-axis for these extrusions. Thankfully, we actually have this nice, what do we got? We got the, we have the hour and minute hand here. So if I hit Control 1, notice everything's kind of inside. So this is nice where I can do Control 1. And then I can bring down this height to something like 0.15 to get a little bit of thickness, and hit F to frame in. So if you're all the way out here, if you press F on your keyboard, it'll zoom in on the object. All right. Now, what I can do is go into face mode, and I can just extrude these faces here. And you can do that by the 3 different ways. And actually, there's a 4th way, right? And the way to do that is if you just simply hold shift and move, watch. See how it now says extrude? So shift and left click drag, and there you go. We can now get this to come out, and it created some new faces. We can scale this down, so we can scale these faces, so you can scale sub-objects. And this will work for what we need. If you want to scale the faces where they're a little bit more square, just scale them down like so, because I have these selected, right? So if you see this in 3D, watch. You can just kind of scale them down to kind of make them a bit more planar. All right, so we have that, and then I can just do a simpler extrusion here. So we select these, and again, I'll do it using the shift move. So we go to our move tool, hold shift, and move this out. And this is going to be coming out right about here. So right to the end of the black mark. And I can switch to my R scale tool, scale that where it's completely flat. If you go all the way, it's nice. It actually kind of clamps it and keeps it completely planar there. So that's a nice way to keep things planar. All right, so now that we have that, what I want to do is hit Control 1, go into object mode. I'm going to select the lens and just straight up hide it for right now. And you can see I can't see my minute and hour hand, so I can go into X-ray mode, which we have right here. And then I can also select them in our outliner here. So I can select pipe, and I can just now toggle off X-ray mode and move this out till we get something like this. And there you go. So we want this to be pretty close, but not quite clipping. And if I hit Control D now, because now I want to create the other hand, I can now move this out even further, and we get something like this. And I'll just put wireframe unshaded just so I can get a little bit closer here. This will work. And now I can just rotate this. And because again, I did this all at the origin, the pivots are all nicely at the origin, and this works perfectly to rotate around. Again, I can cover pivots in a later video, but we're running out of time here. So this will work for what we're trying to accomplish. So this covers the entire modeling portion, and I can take all of these objects, put them inside this group here. You know, I can just call this, you know, watch demo. And what I want to do is just quickly like select this lens here and put some transparency on it. So what I'll do is select the face, hold right click, and assign new material. Or favorite material is fine. And I can do like a Fong or a Blinn. Either one will work. And if I delete history, because now I don't want to go through all that history detail, delete your history, go to the Fong, and I can just call it, you know, glass. I can increase the transparency. This isn't a rendering tutorial, but at least to give us some differences between opaque and transparent objects. And what we can do now is you can make some adjustments, right, to these. So if you notice your glass is coming in a little bit and clipping a bit, we can kind of fix that really easily. So what I will do is kind of select these faces here. I'm going to leave this one. So I'll grab the every other one, control backspace. So this is a good time to show you control backspace. So it'll delete edges and vertices. Double click this edge here, and let's try that again. Kind of middle mouse drag. We'll kind of move these like so. And what I'm going to do as well is add another edge here to about the top to give us a little bit more clearance, because I need to clear this edge here. So we get something like this, right? I'm just going to move that to have a little bit more, and then I can get a little bit more precise. So I can double click these edges and just move these out again. So notice how I'm changing these. And I want to grab this inner piece here. So I'll show you how to convert selections. So if I select these edges, hold Control, right click, and look, I can go to 2 vertices. And if you can go to vertices selection, and then I can also Control Shift or Shift to add selection, or marquee select that. Now I can move these out just a little bit more, right? So we get something like this. That's going to help us here. And I will then go back and kind of meet halfway, right? Where I will grab this minute hand and go to the modeling toolkit, and I'll go to vertice mode and just move these in just a little bit. One is going to be a little bit longer than the other, so that will work. And I like to jump to the outliner if I start having layered objects here. And make sure, by the way, you're set to object, not world. So if you're here, you'll notice you'll have to manually do that, and then you'll kind of throw it off a bit. But if you're set to object, it'll use the rotation of the object, and you can easily move this back down. Perfect. So I like that. That will kind of fix that issue where we had that clipping, so kind of meeting halfway. And I will move this back and in the Z, and just let's bring back that multi-cut. And now we'll kind of add that detail right back in where we have that nice curvature. Okay, so what I recommend for this final detailing step, all right, is to select, all of your objects, delete the history, and then duplicate everything in this group. And what I typically do is create another group. So I'll group this again. And the way to do that is Control G, or you go to just Edit and Group, and you can see it, Control G. Now, I make this, so I call this my whip group or backup group, whatever you want to call it. So whip is for work in progress. Then I will hide this group with Control H. Go back to the watch. I want to add this final level of beveling details, because what I end up seeing students do a lot when they first create their 3D models is they'll stop here. And when you're creating 3D models, no matter how sharp these corners are, look around you, right? Look around your desk space, your office space, wherever you're at. Even the things that have the sharpest corners still have multiple millimeters worth of a radius, right? So we're going to do that here. And what I mean by that is now select your edges. So let's go select our main piece, double click your edges like so, and we get this. Then once you double click, by the way, in order to add your selection, I should explain, is double click that. If you want to add another selection, hold Control Shift, double click. Holding Control Shift, double click, and then double click, right? So you can select multiple loops at the same time. Then we're going to use one of my favorite tools, which is Bevel, right? And I click Bevel here in the modeling toolkit and opens this up, and there you go. It creates this nice detail here. And I'm going to keep this at 0.5 because this is already a small object. So I don't really want to go tight. I'll see students do this where they'll set this to like 0.1, like really, really tight. And it gets so sharp, you're limited by the pixels that you render. So we want the pixels to pick up this bevel here. So we'll keep this at a nice fraction of 0.5. Then I'll add segments of 1. Or excuse me, I'll add one more segment and set it to 2. This will work fine. In some instances, I'll have chamfer off. So notice how if on and off, what it does, right? With off, it rounds this and gives you kind of this nice filleted look. With chamfer off, it's back to this original, essentially this like 90 degree, right? What's nice about chamfer off is that I can go back and delete these edges, Control Backspace, and it doesn't change the form. If I did that with bevel, for example, you'll see that it kind of breaks that a little bit. So it's nothing to worry about when you're first learning 3D, but just understand that's what chamfer is going to do. All right. So there. And so we've added that nice chamfer detail. And what I want to do now is actually separate this face on the inside. So the way that we can do that is isolate with Control 1, go into face mode, select these faces again, make sure we have no other faces selected, and hold Shift right click. And this time I'm going to use extract faces. So instead of duplicate, extract will just select the faces and separate them, and then there you go. Then I will select both of them, delete the history, and you can see that I kind of created this subgroup. I don't need that subgroup, so I'll just move it out after I delete history and then delete that. Otherwise, you'll have a transform node that you have to get rid of. But all right. Then what I can do is, hey, we already mirrored this. Now I want to add some symmetry, right? Because I don't want to bevel this one side and then bevel this. You can always do that, delete the faces and resymmetry, or remirror, or you can just simply use symmetry. So I'll use world Z. It's based off of this Z axis here. So this will give us, world X. I always work with Z forward sometimes. So, but yeah, we'll do world X. So, this is also dependent on if you use this in the front or the side view. So just know that it's dependent on whatever axis is your line of symmetry. In this case, it's X. So I will double click these edges, double click, holding Control Shift, holding Control Shift, holding Control Shift, and then I'm just going to do that nice bevel here. And I will bevel, and I'll leave it at 0.5. That will work. Add 2 segments. That will work. And we will move on to the final piece. So you can see what symmetry did. It just applied it, right? So if I undo, redo, you can see that it applied it. So once we're done with that, you can actually turn that off at the top as well. And you can add that to this crazy object if you'd like. Sometimes you don't need to, but just something to be careful of. If I select all the edges here, like so, oops, I have to turn off camera-based selection. So turn off camera-based selection, select all the edges, great. And then bevel again. This may be overkill, but this is fine because you can always bake this down to a texture map if you'd like, and then increase this to 2 segments, and there you go. Cleans it up really nice, and it's a nice planar object, so look how good that looks, right? This nice clean bevel. Make sure that you do use 2 segments, because if you use one, you're like, well, I want to save some polys. You get these n-gons and triangles here, so just a good example of why you'd want to do that. And the reason why is because if you wanted to subdivide these models, you certainly can. Okay, you might be saying, well, what's subdivide? If this is your first time in 3D, we can potentially get into that. But what you're going to do is select all of these objects, delete history again. So once we've beveled everything. And if I select this kind of main object here, what I can do now is if you press 3 on your keyboard, look at that, right? The 3 on the keyboard will smooth this, kind of mesh smooth this as a preview. So this is called smooth preview. If you hit 2, you kind of get this like cage here. So I do 1 or 3. So if you see people do this and you're like, how the heck they're doing that? It's 1 for base or default view and 3 for smooth preview. All right. That, just to kind of summarize, would lead into sub-D modeling, which this isn't what this is about, but you can subdivide with holding shift, right click, and doing smooth faces. Just be careful. Don't do this and delete history and stuff like that. Always keep your base mesh. Hence, this is why I have our original model, right? So if I move this over, and you can see kind of the detail here. Now it might be getting lost here. I can actually bring back maybe the textured version, or I wouldn't say textured, but the material version, right? So we have something like that. You'll notice that the bevels hold up really, really nicely. And if I hit 3, just to kind of smooth that out a bit, you'll see how much nicer that looks compared to this, which doesn't have our bevels. And if you hit 3 on your keyboard, watch what happens. It turns into mush, right? Now it turns into mush because it needs more geometry and bevels to hold that form. So I will cover that in a future tutorial, which understanding, sub-D modeling, and then understanding how to then take this model and bake all of this texture detail down to this model. Because this, even if I have this one, which is pretty high poly, by the way, if you want to see this HUD here, if this is the first time, you can go to display, heads up display, poly count, right? And that'll show that here. And you can see that this is about 3,000 tries, which is still pretty high for a simple prop. So there's more to optimize here. But this, with all this detail here, is 11,000. And if we were to subdivide this, if I were to do like a quick shift right click and smooth this, this looks really good and is 45,000 now. And we can bake this down to this model. All right. So I'm bringing all of this up so you can understand the reasoning behind these workflows. So I'll Control Z, kind of undo the smooth preview, and understand why we bevel, understand why I duplicate the models, why I have this as a backup if I wanted to create a game ready model. If I'm doing VFX and just doing standard sub-D modeling, then this will work great. And then it can take you on to the next steps. All right. So I was trying to keep this around 30 minutes, but man, boy, do I love talking about this stuff. So I hope you guys found this helpful. All I ask at minimum is if you guys can just give the YouTube channel a like. That will help this channel grow. That'll help get the video out to more people. And I just, I'm all about just getting this knowledge out to people. And all my tutorials are free. I will not monetize anything. Maybe I'll set up a Patreon. A lot of people asked, hey, can we get models? And if we did a Patreon, so if we can talk about that later. But anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. Give me a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff as I help continue to grow this content. I hope I didn't go too long on this. Let me know if you want me to kind of make shorter videos, longer videos in the comments. I did a poll actually about that here and under the community tab. I'm kind of reaching out to the community and kind of seeing, what people would like to focus on. Oh, let me switch to my YouTube channel here. Yeah, so you can see that, a lot of people want a lot more of the, beginner, intermediate, core modeling, and advanced. So I will definitely cover that, and do a combination of the, some short form, mid-level and longer form. So I think I'm probably here, but we'll see when I'm done editing this. But again, if you found this helpful, give me a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys around. Take care.